everybody. That's how I spell my name. So I'm going to show you, even though this is the typewriter's book, I'm going to show you a little bit of all the stuff that I do. I promise I'll keep it short. Let's get the politics out of the way right off the bat. That was a recent piece. That was a year ago for Vanity Fair. That was for an essay written by, I'm sorry. Oops. That was for an essay written by a historian about how history will judge Trump. Spoiler alert, not well. That was another recent piece for Vanity Fair. One of the editors in Vanity Fair had written a book about the joys of reading children's books to his kids. So, and in the book, he talks about a lot of famous kids' books. So the illustration is basically him reading his book to all of these characters from these kids' books. This was a book I wrote with James Victori called In and Out with Dick and Jane. And the subtitle is A Loving Parody because I actually love those books. I was taught to read with the Dick and Jane books. And I really love the illustration style. And it's one of those things, it's really easy to make cracks about, Dick and Jane. And the title is kind of a reflection of that. But I really wanted to do something that was kind of like, that wasn't just, cracking on Dick and Jane. It was more about what would happen if Dick and Jane lived in our modern world, and they're seeing all the stuff that we see, but through their eyes. So they don't think what they're seeing is bad or weird. They see all this stuff and they just think it's great, So this is our neighborhood. Lots of nice people live here. These are the Joneses. Mrs. Jones is pretty. And the page before this, Billy is bouncing off the classroom walls, running around like crazy, throwing papers everywhere. And then the final shot is a hand coming into the frame, handing him a handful of pills. And this is the following spread. This was actually a piece that I did a sketch for the New York Times magazine way back before Columbine. And it was one of the things that kind of made James and I think about doing this book, because we were friends for years and I would have these sketches. This thing, I don't believe it ever ran in the Times, but I kept it hanging on my wall. There's another one in here too, I'll show you. This is it here. This was a sketch I did for the Los Angeles Times magazine. It was an article, autobiographical piece written by a gay man who was talking about the experiences he'd had when he was really young that, he realized later in life were basically signs that he was gay, but when he was young, he didn't know what that was. He didn't know how to interpret them. And one of the things was he liked to play dress up with his mom's clothes and try on her shoes. It's like he'd fling his dad's shoes back in the closet and put on his mom's high heels and walk around, and he just loved it. So I did this sketch, and the Los Angeles Times magazine editor said, "Oh no, we can't show that. We'll get angry letters." And why? And this often happens where they'll say, "Yeah, you can say it in the piece, but when you show it on the page, it's like, whoa, we can't show that." So I don't remember what I did, but this was another sketch that hung on the wall, and that ended up becoming one of the seeds of the In and Out with Dick and Jane book. Drawn from life. Guess who learned how to use the type thing in Keynote? Okay. This was a recent piece for the New York Times Book Review, as you might have guessed. They had some books on comics or about cartoonists or whatever, and so it was kind of a theme issue, and they said, here's the size of the space, just fill it up with something pretty. And so I did kind of kind of a comic that doesn't really make sense or go anywhere, but there's kind of almost a story there, and then the cartoonist is trying to figure out where he goes from there. And this was a poster I did with James Victoria years ago. This is one of the first pieces we did together. Steve Heller hired us to write a humorous piece about working in the design industry. So we, at the time, were taking self-defense courses from this 85-year-old guy named Charlie, who could, throw us all around the room. And we thought, we were sitting in a restaurant afterwards, and we were looking at the choking poster, and we thought, let's do a workplace safety poster for an art department. So this has all kinds of stuff about how to defend yourself against, an editor who tries to tell you how to do your job. Somebody, the third one down, he's trying to stab him with a bad contract. And this was a piece for Steve Heller. This is one of those scary jobs you get where it's like, you get to do all the illustrations in the whole issue for the summer reading thing, buy, click, and then you have to come up with an idea of what to do. That process usually involves curling up, crying on the floor at some point. It's just terrifying dealing with a blank space and something so, scrutinized. So I did, the parody of the Charles Atlas ads. This was a comic I did for a small magazine, and this is one of those situations where they said, we have almost no budget, we have a very small budget, we're a small startup magazine, we're doing an article about advertising. We don't necessarily want you to illustrate the article, but we would like it if you would do a full-page piece that accompanies the article, that kind of riffs on the same topic. And we don't have much budget, so you can do anything you want. So, of course you go, anything? And at the time, I had just moved to Connecticut, and I was driving my little minivan around Connecticut, and I had my two kids in the back, and we'd be playing the radio. And, after a song played, this ad had come on for erectile dysfunction or, male enhancement. My kids would be like, hey, Daddy, what's male enhancement? And I'd be like, trying to turn the radio down. And I thought, what the fuck is going on? There's this suddenly there's this epidemic of erectile dysfunction. I mean, it's on the TV, it's on the radio. What the hell? I don't remember ever hearing about this. So at the time I was reading a book about advertising, and it talked about a couple of things that advertising does, has famously done. One of them is they sell something to people that has never existed before. Like if you think about air travel, they had to coax people to travel on, by air. So they had to come up with a way of making it appealing. Because let's face it, it just isn't. But the other thing they do is they try to scare you into buying their product. So they'll subtly, like if you ever watch those medication ads on TV, you're like, oh my God, I have that, whatever that is, I have it, I need that stuff. Side effects include explosive diarrhea. Fine, I'm okay with that. Just give me that pill. So that's what this is about. This is about, advertising sort of terrifying you. And so this piece, they ran it in the magazine. It was the last issue of the magazine. It failed directly after that. I like to think I had a little something to do with it. This was a piece for the New York Times. This is one of those things, like illustration is sometimes, you get an article, you try to figure out a way to create a visual that goes with the content of the article. But there was a lot of occasions where, and this was one of them, that called and said, we're having this terrible flu going around, we're seeing this phenomenon where people have stopped shaking hands with each other, or they don't want to hug anyone. So can you do something about that? So this is what I came up with. It was kind of the workplace safety thing again, risk of contact, estimated levels of risk for different kinds of greetings. And whenever you work writing stuff for magazines, especially for the New York Times, you at some point get a call from the fact checker. And the fact checker called and he said, the editors have a really hard time with the bro hug, because that's not a word. And I'm like, what do you think it should be? And he said, they think it should be brother hug. And I'm like, okay. If you want us all to look like total fools, then let's make it brother hug. And I had to convince him that the bro hug was a thing. It was okay. So that's probably the first time that bro hug appeared in the New York Times. I'm not 100% sure. NASA actually called me, the chief flight surgeon for NASA for the shuttle missions, which were still going on at the time, called me and said I have a real problem with astronauts who are in what do you call it, where they're away from people so they don't catch isolation. Yeah, and then they're ready to go on the shuttle to fly up to the space station, and they've been isolated for 2 weeks so they don't, so we can check them that they're not sick. You can't have sick people up on the space station. Then it's time to get on the space shuttle. They come out and they're all hugging and slobbering all over everyone. And I have to educate them not to do this. It's really, really hard. They just don't get it. So he said, can I use this in the briefing? So this was used in the last few shuttle missions. And this was a comic that was done for an exhibition of sketches for editorial work. And whenever I do a sketch that gets killed, I hang it in a big bulldog clip on the wall, and I've got like 3 of these things and like 2 inches thick. And so what I did was I went through the stacks of old sketches, and this piece is a comic created out of sketches that were all killed for different projects. How could I resist, right? Now this one's got type in it, huh? So this was a kid's book I did called A Chew Bang Crash, The Noisy Alphabet. And it's all set in 19th century wood type. No typeface is repeated in the book. And it's all noise words. And then the illustrations are drawn directly on the proofs. And then this was a kid's book I did fairly recently called 789, 8 as in A-T-E. You know that old joke, why 6 afraid of 7 because 789? If you don't, then you're just laughing your ass off because I just told it to you. So the author wrote a piece about, 6 coming for help to Private Eye, get it? Huh? I? For solving the mystery. And that's wood type printed, and the illustrations are drawn again. There's me. I'm 16 years old, running a platen press. I still wear those jeans as a belt. And that was my start. I started off after a bunch of really crappy jobs. I dropped out of school before the end of high school and left home and ran away to the big city of Toronto, and I worked a bunch of crappy jobs, and then I got a job working for a paper maker who was an artist, made a whole bunch of handmade paper, and then I got a job in a printing press, a place called Coach House Press, which publishes stuff as well. And then after about a year and a half there, I started a letterpress business called Dreadnought Press with my older brother and a bunch of hippies. And we printed and published stuff too, and that's where I started doing illustration, was stuff that we would need a small decorative initial or a spot illustration, usually in lino cut. And this is some of the stuff that we published at Dreadnought Press. Sonnet to Liberty by Oscar Wilde. We published a book called Whale Sound. It was all poetry and art about whales. Proceeds were donated to Greenpeace. Then many years later, after publishing stuff like that poster, that Get Tough poster with James Victoria, I was working with printers in New York, and it was kind of problematic. These were really small jobs for them, running off 500 posters, and we would say, okay, we want to come by and do a press check at 8 in the morning, and you get there at 8 in the morning, the job was already printed or almost printed, and the colors were off register, and there was always problems. And I thought, we're paying these guys good money and they're doing a half-assed job. I can do a half-assed job for free. I know how to do this. So I started buying a couple of fonts. I bought a little tabletop flatbed press, and I thought I'll get 2 or 3 fonts of wood type, and then I'll be able to publish my own stuff. And of course, 2 or 3 fonts, what can you do? 2 different sizes of wood type, nothing. So naturally I had about 1,000 volumes of wood type in no time flat and had to move out of the city. So that was one of the first pieces I did at my newly formed Brightwork press. Dreadnought Press. Dreadnought is the name of a British battleship. Brightwork is the name of the brass on a ship. So that's where I got that from. That's from a boy who grew up in Saskatchewan and never had seen the ocean before. So no big story behind any of that. This is a piece I put in when I promise, eventually get to the movie props. When I do like a real, what they call a hero prop, one of the things I learned at the print shop, and one of the things I tell interns is, when you package up the finished work, especially something like a prop, you package it perfectly. Like, we wrap everything in brown craft paper, but it's tight, the edges and corners are tight, the corners are perfect, the size of the flap is exactly right. We use brown craft tape on it. It's perfectly placed. It's got to look like, they got to start saying wow before they even open it and see the picture. And then when they open it, that's on top. And because they'll say, well, the interns will say, well, you don't see any of that stuff on screen. And it's like, who gives a fuck? I don't care about the audience. I care about the director. He's the guy who signs my checks, remember? And this was another promo piece. I always say I do the kind of promo that drives the paying clients away. Because I had worked for many years as an illustrator, I was sending these pieces out to art directors I had worked with. So I didn't really need to send a piece that said, hey, hire me to do letterpress. I just wanted to send them something cool. And I knew that the ones who liked it would call me up and say, hey, what the hell is this? And then I could sell them on the phone. And this is kind of my reaction to letterpress. Having been in letterpress for many years, when you're in the small press world, because that's what that is, you're usually publishing materials for libraries and collectors. And there's this whole sort of mystique about letterpress, that it's like this very refined, kind of special thing, and we only use the finest paper, and the finest typefaces. And I was always like, it's ink on paper. Yeah, it was originally used for everything, crappy and good. You can do super refined, beautiful work all the time, but I want to have fun. I want to do fun stuff that looks fun. So this is kind of based on old tobacco packaging. By old, I'm talking like 1700s. And then it says our motto: nobody's perfect. Perfectly fine typography, a specialty Brightwork press. And that, type nerd alert. That type used in the word perfect, that's a fat face italic that was cast in Boston before 1830. The mats, you can tell from the type that the punches were hand cut with tools, and it's not cut with a punch cutter. This is another letterpress piece. This was a poster for a small film. I often use this piece as a sort of demonstration when I'm talking to design students about how you design in letterpress, because you can't change the size of anything. And one of the examples I give is that curved line of type. I'll say, yes, I love the way it looks. I think it looks great. But the reason I did it like that was because the line wouldn't fit. So I tried setting it in a combination of upper and lowercase, and it still wouldn't fit. Put it on a curve, it fit. And it looks good. Probably wouldn't have thought of that. This is a book cover, so it's done in old letterpress type, again, 19th century type, and I just took the proof outside and took a snapshot of it with my iPhone, and then dropped it into the illustration. And that's something, usually when that happens, where you scream like that, it's usually because you put the giant stack of hand-printed 3-color letterpress whatever in the paper cutter, and you mistakenly put the top piece the wrong way around, so when the blade cuts down, you see the side of the pile and realize you just cut through the center of the thing that took you 3 days to print. That's when the crying starts. Another book cover. There's what the proof looked like. There's what the type looks like on the bed of the press. Another book cover. That's what the type looked like for that one. These are all what are called curved quads and curved furniture. That's a combination of illustration and type for a op-ed page piece. I originally submitted that. I was asked to submit a design for a mural at the 42nd Street subway station by the MTA. And I did that hand with yes, you, and huge type on either side. I'm still waiting for the call back on that one. I don't know why they didn't like it. That piece was, I was printing that on the morning of the first Muslim ban. Just, you know, I'm an immigrant, so it kind of is something that I feel pretty strongly about. That piece I did in collaboration with Steve Heller for SBA. Finally, we're at the props. There's me back in the early 80s. I used to work in television a little bit. When I was first working in illustration, I supported myself by painting houses and doing construction. And I got hired by this guy to do some landscaping on his place, and it turned out he was a small-time TV producer. And you know, it's like if you show up somewhere with a tool belt on, everyone sort of goes, hey, what about this? Can you do this? And so I got work painting sets at this really kind of low-rent television studio that used to rent itself out to people doing, you know, commercials and, you know, low-budget shows and stuff. And I used to paint backdrops and build little sets like the fake detective's office and the fake kitchen for the commercial and stuff like that. And through that, I got work working on a kid's show, building props and sets. So, and they had zero budget. So luckily, as a house painter, I had many, many cans of colored house paint around. And they only had to pay for the foam core. And that's me acting in the show. Because again, you know, you're standing around and they're like, hey, we need some idiot to dress up in a robot costume. Hey, you there. Get over here. And that's another shot from the kids show. With all these kids. Kids are terrible actors. And this was the first, so then I, you know, got into illustration. I moved to New York, and in 1993, I met a guy, literally met a guy at a party, and he was like, oh yeah, I know your work. Hey, we're working on this movie, and we need a guy to do this faux 1930s children's book. And so I was like, yeah, okay, you know, at the party. And, oops. And then I went through this period where it was like super intense deadlines, lots of all-nighters, and my wife and I went to Cape Cod. And this is back in '93, back when you couldn't track people down through their phones. But I started getting these desperate messages on my answering machine, which I would check, like, we really want you to come out to LA and talk to us about this movie that we want you working on. I was like, yeah, right. Like, that'll ever happen. You know, it's just another one of these harebrained projects. As an illustrator, you get all kinds of stuff like this. Like, hey, I wrote this great kids book that's going to sell 1 million copies. Can you illustrate for me? Or just, you know, lots of, and I just thought it was one of these things. Then I sort of thought, these guys were very persistent, and I thought, well, I'll just get rid of them by, I said, how much am I going to get paid? And they said, well, what do you want to get paid? I said, I want to get $5 grand a week. And they're like, okay, done. There's a ticket waiting for you at the counter. I was like, oh, fuck. I probably could have asked for 10 grand. And I worked on set for 6 months in Chicago. It's a John Hughes film, Baby's Day Out. And met a lot of really great people. I got to be on set and watch the filming, see how it's all done. It was back before digital effects. So for that movie, they created the largest painted backdrop that had ever been done up to that point for the cityscape scene. There's a scene where they're going through various hijinks in a building site, a skyscraper. That's all built inside of a inside of a building, a 3-story construction. And I got to see all this great stuff and meet all the people in the art department, the producers and directors and stuff. And I got back to New York after 6 months, and I thought, that was fun. I'll never do that again, because when is anybody ever going to need a book and a movie again? And all the people that I worked with went on to other movies, and so a couple of years later, I started getting these phone calls from people, and it just snowballed. Now it's, you know, it varies. For the last 5 months, it's probably 90% of what I was doing is movie prop work. Other times it'll slow down to nothing. So there's some screen grabs. Oh, that's Cynthia Nixon there. That's the nanny. Yeah. I got to touch the hem of her gown. And they use the illustrations in the credits as well. And then the second movie I worked on was The Alamo, and this one's a good story to illustrate how it is working with movies and how I've gotten to do what I do. I've always haunted flea markets and yard sales, and I buy the most ridiculous old rickety crap, and I take it home and I'm like, why did I spend 25 bucks on this piece of crap? And a lot of what I buy is old books and stuff, and old, like things like ledgers and, you know, not even real books, just like really the kind of stuff where you get home and go, why did I buy this? So I get a phone call from these guys saying, we're working on this movie, The Alamo. William Travis, who's a real guy, because it's history, he had a ledger. He had a diary, and it was a ledger. It was a store-bought ledger. That's all we know about it. You know, so-and-so here in the set design department says you collect all this old crap, and maybe you know about this stuff. Do you know what it would look like? And I said, well, yeah, I have a store ledger from 1835. That's when the Alamo happened. It says right there, 1835. And 36, yeah. And but the action was 35. The store ledger is huge. It weighs like 10 pounds. They're really tall and skinny and bound in leather. And he was a soldier traveling on horseback. Probably didn't have a store ledger, but I have this other thing, which is a sheet of paper, a Dodger from a stationery supply store, and it has a list of all the materials they sell. And on that list is something called a pocket ledger. And I said, I know from a lot of the books I collect from around that time period that you used to be able to buy books in different bindings, the same books in different bindings, depending on how much money you wanted to spend. The cheapest binding was called the trade binding. And the trade binding at that time was almost always pale blue paper over thin wooden boards with a leather spine. Around that time, machine-made paper had been around for 40 years. He's buying this at a place on the East Coast, probably using machine-made paper. The Hickok ruling machine had been invented in the late 1700s. It's still used to print ruled paper today because it does it so much faster and more efficiently than actually printing offset or any other way. But they're still in use all over the place. So it had been around for 35, 40 years. I'm guessing, my best guess is, just what I said, right? And the guy says, nah, we're thinking like real rough paper and then, a hunk of leather wrapped around it and then maybe a leather thong wrapped around a piece of antlers, I'm like, okay, great, whatever you say, mister. And then he called me back a couple of days later. He said, we sent an intern to the museum and they pulled down his diary and it looked exactly like what you described. So, which was complete lucky break. I mean, it could have looked like almost anything, but it just happened to be pale blue binding rule paper. So I was golden from then on in. And I made a whole bunch of props. And then they shut down production. Everybody went home because the director had a fight with the studios, Disney, Ron Howard. And they came back a few months later with a totally new crew. We opened up the prop trailer, dust bunnies, nothing left. Everything had been stolen. And so I had to recreate everything I'd already done. And at that point, I'd thrown everything away, including all the research I'd done. This book I had to put together from all kinds of different sources. I got pages from, emailed to me from museums. They're really, really, really hard to find. And I threw all that stuff away. And so that was the movie that I learned I always make a safety. I always keep a safety, and it saved my ass so many times since then. Stuff has gotten lost by FedEx or whatever. Always have a backup copy of everything, and I keep all the files. This is some of the letters. So whenever you're working on a movie like this, there's always some point with, the actors say, yeah, like I want to write that letter at the quill pen, and you're like, okay, you send them a quill pen, and you talk to them, or you send them an email about how to work the pen and stuff like that, and then, about 20 minutes later, you get a call saying, well, actually, can you write the letter? Quill pens are really difficult to work with properly. This was for a movie called Infamous. This is one of those, every prop person works on the serial killer or horrible murderer thing, and this was my chance. This was one of the murderers in Cold Blood case, the Clutter family. He was an amateur artist. Then a lot of the action of that movie happened in writing because they were in prison, and the director/writers speculated that there was a romantic connection between one of the murderers and Truman Capote, and there was a lot of back and forth in letters. So what happens in this situation is I get a script. It might have the 2 lines or 1 line of the letter that's read in the scene. That's it. There's almost no description in scripts, by the way. They're description free because that is supplied by the director. The director is the one who decides what everything looks like. So my job is to, first of all, get samples of Truman Capote's handwriting, which luckily they have them all his letters at the New York Public Library, and learn to write like him, learn to write like Perry Smith, who's the killer. This is Perry Smith's handwriting. And then figure out all kinds of text to go before and after the 2 lines that are in the script. Then you have to do research into, well, first of all, you have to think of an address. Very often they want what's called clearable stuff, meaning it's an address that doesn't exist, so they can't be sued, which never happens, but they're so worried about getting sued. So you have to create a fake address that doesn't exist. Then you have to do research about whether or not there's zip codes at that time that this letter is happening. Then you have to do research about what stamps are in use, what postmarks look like, and then you have to think about what kind of paper they would have written their letters on. Perry would have written his letters on cheap jail stationery or paper. Truman Capote had beautiful Cranes stationery. So that's, for something that flashes by on the screen, you'll hear me complaining about this for the rest of the night. It's weeks and weeks of work, and that's really become a big part of how things are done nowadays, because it used to be you'd have to really kind of convince directors to get that, uptight about getting things right. They'd kind of go, hey, it's okay, or can kind of look just sort of like it. But now, and partly because of the fans being able to frame by frame stuff in high def on their TV screen at home, and then go on Google it and say that address doesn't exist. They get all the directors and all the props people and everybody, the new song they're all singing is period correct. We want to be period correct. So no amount of research is ever too much. King of California, Michael Douglas. This illustration becomes animated. Michael Douglas walks into the frame, and him and the monk walk off through the city streets together. Great movies. Evan Rachel Wood. Got poor distribution because the distributor went bankrupt after they bought the rights to the film, but it's really a great movie. This was Seabiscuit. This book, now this is one of the things I wanted to mention about how props are used in movies. There's a type of prop called a hero prop, and that is a prop that's carried by one of the major actors. And props are things that are carried by, handled by actors. Props can include jewelry and glasses. Everything else the actor wears is wardrobe. Anything that's on the walls is set decoration. The actual walls themselves are set design. So props are, really like right there with the actors. And props are often used to tell part of the story that the director doesn't want to, tell another way. Like it's a way of communicating something. It can be a vague feeling or it can be a real hard point just through seeing this thing and sometimes how people react to it. So this book appears throughout Seabiscuit. It starts off, it's the guy who owns the horse, Seabiscuit, the rich guy. He has a son, about 12, 13 years old. This is his son's favorite book. Now, talking about period correctness, they said, we want it to be a book about space and the future, and the date is, I forget what it was, 39 or something like that. And I said, it's got to be Buck Rogers. He's the original. He was around then. They said, okay, great. They came back and they said, we can only get the rights to Flash Gordon. I'm like, okay, there goes period correctness. And so this kid's always talking to Dad about the future. Dad, the future's gonna be great, Dad. Well, you know what that means, right? 2 seconds later, the kid's run over and killed. How did you not see that coming? Please. Have you ever seen a movie? And so there he is in his son's bedroom looking at the Flash Gordon book. Now, nothing is said, but you're getting a lot of, and this comes up other times, and why that's important is because he adopts this young jockey who lives there and ends up riding Seabiscuit and winning. So we sort of see how he has a connection with this young jockey, because of the connection with his son. Legend of Zorro, these are all printed letterpress from period wood type. It's all about the California statehood. This was a book for the Legends of Zorro called Enemies of the Church. Now, my job is, I'm a prop designer and prop fabricator, but a lot of what I do is research. That's usually the biggest part of any one of these particular jobs. And I get hired just for research a lot of times, but I also get hired to consult, and that often comes up with almost every prop. And I'll give you an example of this thing. So the script says, like I said, script has very little description, just enough to sort of let the people know what something is supposed to be. So this is a scene where he goes to visit a monk to find out something. And the monk pulls a book down off the shelf, and in the script it says the book is thousands of years old and it's printed on papyrus and it's about the Crusades. So I go back to them and say, okay, where to begin with this one? The Crusades didn't happen thousands of years ago. They were still going on when printing was around. So why don't we do that? Papyrus was used by the ancient Egyptians to write on, and by almost no one else, and you can't print on it. And, the book can't be thousands of years old. It just can't be. The end. Then you sort of say, okay, but how about we do this? Here's what books from around 1500 look like. Gutenberg starts printing in Germany. By 50 years later, there were 70 cities in Europe that had more than one printer in them. And thousands of books had been printed full of illustrations. There's all kinds of great historic material to draw on. You don't have to make up. Like oftentimes when you see a movie and you see a book prop, and it's what I call the Bed Knobs and Broomsticks book. It's got a rolling eyeball on it, and hands coming over it's just, it looks like no book anyone has ever seen. And I always say, there's a fantastic wealth of historic material to draw on. You don't need to go crazy like that. You can make any kind of book, like a cult or whatever you want, using historic models. So that's the process. That's the consultation process. Let's do this. Here's some period illustrations. There's lots of creepy stuff. Lots of great looking type. And the other thing was, in the script, in the scene, the monk pulls down the thing, goes, yeah, enemies of the church. He flips it open, he starts reading the text in perfect California English, and I said, most books at that point would have been Latin. And so they changed the scene. He pulls it down. He says, well, my Latin may be a little rusty, but, you know, blah, blah, blah. So that's the interior of the book. The pages are all basically collages of material swiped from period books. Now this is a prop. This is for National Treasure Book of Secrets. That's the Book of Secrets. That's it over there. This is long. I could spend 3 days here telling you the story how this book all came about. It went through a long design process, and it's become one of those iconic props that prop collectors, and there's a community of people out there called prop replicators. They have forums online, and they obsess over movie props, and they make them. They make their versions of them. I had no idea this existed, and oops, keep doing that. The intern I had at the time sort of turned me on to this whole thing. And, you know, I thought it was like, you know, these people were like Star Trek fans, Star Wars fans, you know, never knew the touch of a woman. But in fact, there's, you know, a lot of really interesting, cool people who are into props. They're just super fans and collect them. And this book is one of the things that I make and sell for these super fans. There's the interior stuff. They were writing this movie as they were shooting it. So when I make this prop, when you make a hero prop, a lot of times what the prop master or the director would say is, we just need one spread, so you can just do the rest of the book blank. And I say, I never do a blank book. I always do extra pages. You might get something that's 12 pages repeated, but when you have been on set with an actor who looks at this prop and flips the page and says, it's just blank, I can't do anything with it. I have to just walk up to it with it open and start reading it. I can't flip to the page, it's just not natural. So I never do a blank book, I never do blank pages. There's always something in the book. In this case, we didn't know how the book was going to be used. We knew that there was going to be stuff around the presidents, but we didn't know which ones or what it was going to be. So I actually got samples of handwriting of every single president. There's 4 or 5 pages from every president in there, and it's actually really difficult to get samples of handwriting from some presidents. I was approaching autograph dealers and asking them if they had any documents from these. I had a list of presidents that I couldn't find stuff from, and they would say, you know, I got something from this guy, some from this guy, and they'd say, could you send really high-res scans? Because I really need to get a good look at it. And then a lot of there's about 100 extra documents stuffed into the book, many of which are real things. That's a real photo. This is where the whole idea that the moon landing is faked comes from, because on the NASA website there are photos of them rehearsing with the equipment in a warehouse. And you can go on the NASA website, if you're willing to spend an hour digging around, you can find them. There's hundreds of them. Some of them are hilarious because there's guys in white shirts standing around smoking cigarettes. So the director said, we just want a bunch of secrets. I don't know what they are, just, you know, make stuff up. So I thought, well, moon landing, Area 51, death of Marilyn Monroe, JFK, you know, there's a lot of great stuff to work with there. So I just made stuff up. You know, I got a picture of Lizzie Borden and I wrote "Love Lizzie" on it. And some of them are real things. Some of them are made up. That photograph, the alien autopsy, that's all done in Photoshop. That letter up top that says "Top Secret," that was a letter from Area 51. So that was heavily researched. I got the name of the Air Force division that was in charge there at the time. I got a sample of their actual letterhead. I wrote a letter that's all about the alien. So at one point they wanted stuff that was good enough to be seen on scene and talked about by the actors, but they didn't know what that was. So they just said, make a lot of really good looking stuff and then we'll figure out if we can use it or not. There's all the JFK stuff. There's tons of it. Again, some of it's made up, some of it's just directly out of the Warren report. More stuff. And this was another sort of consultation thing. So they said, this was in 2007, so that was like the period where they were kind of learning a little bit about being more concerned about historic accuracy. But you know, this movie, it's a movie, it's fun. So they said, we have the scene where John Wilkes Booth is in it, and he shows this guy a diary. It's sort of an Easter egg about the previous National Treasure movie, where they wanted to show Nicolas Cage's ancestor researching something that we see in the first movie. So they thought, well, we'll have John Wilkes Booth come in to the tavern and ask him to decipher something. And so just make some old-looking diary. So I did research on John Wilkes Booth's diary, and it's one of those great American mysteries about which there's a jillion conspiracy theories, because there's missing pages in the front. The diary was studied by the Secret Service. They photographed it in every wavelength of light to try to find if there was any secret hidden in there. And so I obtained the Secret Service photos of it, and I did a show and tell presentation with the director saying, you know, we should make it look like this. Like, it's worth it to make it look right, because it's this amazing thing. And he agreed, and in fact it got written more into, it's a fairly major part of the movie. There's the Secret Service photo, along with My Replica, the diary. The Secret Service photo is hanging on the wall over there, and the diary replica is over here. I made the diary slightly wider. That's the one change I made, because the actors' hands were fairly large, and we wanted to be able to get in close on this cipher that they used. That was an illustration. This was another case where, again, you know, I got lucky on this one because they were writing it as they went. And so I was able to feed them stuff. They said, we want to do something about Esteban finding the City of Gold. The City of Gold is the thing they're looking for in the movie. So they wanted to mention Esteban. And I said, well, Esteban, I did some research. I said, he's this really cool guy. He's the first African to set foot in North America. He traveled with this expedition of 500 men, 5 ships, caught in a huge storm, shipwrecked, washed up on shore, sort of adopted / kidnapped by a local Indian tribe. They fought their way off the island, swam to the mainland, built a wooden boat, went up the river, and ended up traveling overland all the way up to South Dakota, and then back down to Mexico City, where they were rescued. And Esteban was their translator, and he was also really good with healing, and he would be the one who communicated with the new tribes. He would learn their language. He would find out about healing plants from them. He kept a lot of these guys alive. By the time they get back to Europe, there's only 5 guys left of the original 500, and this guy, Cabeza de Vaca, wrote a book about it called Naufragios. And I said, you know, you gotta do something on Esteban. So they ended up putting a little bit more of a nod to Esteban in the book. And we see several of these illustrations. There's a screenshot, a real bad screenshot of the diary. There's a Playfair cipher that the guy solves. This was for the Book of Eli. I did consultation on the letterpress part. There's a scene at the end of the movie where they're printing the Bible. Jonah Hex. This is a conversation I always got to have on a movie like this. They'll say, you know, we want to do everything really period correct, and we want to do a wanted poster with the guy's picture on it. And I'm like, they didn't exist before the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. There was no pictures on wanted posters. We all think that there were because we watched Gunsmoke when we were kids, but it didn't exist, and they didn't think about it. How would they get the guy's picture? If he had a picture taken, he would have had to go to some little studio somewhere, and he probably sent the original plate to his mother, or maybe he kept it in his pocket. But how would the sheriff get it? He wouldn't. How would he reproduce it? They would have had to have a wood engraving made before around late 1880s, because that's when halftones started to be used, and that's when Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were in action. So, having said that, there was no pictures on wanted posters. Now let's figure out, because I know you're going to want to cheat it somehow so that there's a picture on the wanted poster, so let's figure out how to do it. In this case, we did it as a lino cut. That's Josh Brolin. Boardwalk Empire. This is, there's a lot of Boardwalk Empire props in no particular order. This is from the last season. Gillian Darmody is in a mental institution. Boardwalk Empire was really, the showrunners on that show were extremely concerned with period accuracy, and to the point where, working on the first season, I had to do stuff like show them the patents for paper clips to make sure that they were in use. So everything for Boardwalk Empire is like researched to the point of your head exploding. But it also, you have to write a lot of copy. So they say, we need her psychiatric report. Well, what's in a psychiatric? They don't tell me anything. I have to come up with it. So I had to research what kind of treatment mental patients would have had at that time, and then go and make up endless documents about the treatment she received. This is another one from Boardwalk Empire. They said to me, there's a scene where they're buying a lottery ticket in Cuba. There's this book they use to pick numbers. We need that book. So I did a ton of research, and that's the Lotteria. You can still buy them in delis in New York now, called dream books. People use them to pick lucky numbers. That whole system comes originally from Cuba in the 1850s. And the Cubans had Chinese rail workers building railroads in those days, and the Chinese, some of the Chinese had acupuncture charts where the various acupuncture points are shown as animals. And the Cubans interpreted that as some kind of an occult, lucky kind of thing, like the animals, corresponding to the hands and to the feet. Somehow or other that evolved into this system of picking lottery numbers based on things that you had dreamed. So they created this whole number system. For each number, there's anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 items that correspond. So when you wake up in the morning, you had a dream about a bat, a bed, and a knife, then you know your lottery ticket number that day. So I had to do all the illustrations. And Golden Days, these are screenshots. There's the interior of the magazine. So the entire magazine had to be done, and then this is the hero spread, and this poem was written by one of the writers, so I had to insert that. Now, working on Boardwalk Empire was a 2-week shooting schedule on every episode. You might be working on the episode coming up in 2 weeks. You might be finishing up on the episode that they're shooting right now. And you might be doing cleanup on the previous episode. And so it was insanely busy for 6-7 months of the year. I worked on all 5 seasons. And at the same time, you had to create these things like just dead on accurate with the occasional cheat. The type size is made larger so that we could actually read it on screen. And you also, because of that tight shooting schedule, you never knew whether or not, you never knew how the thing you were making was going to appear. Everything had to be made as if it would appear in close-up like that one just did. And you never knew until they shot it and edited it. They didn't know either. Agent IDs, these are all, incredibly accurate. Of course, they never had badges in their ID wallets. This was one of the few times they varied or wavered from being period accurate. They say, we really want to have the guy show an ID with a badge in it. So I had to create these things. I did dozens of these ID wallets. The actors oftentimes would have notebooks in their pockets with train tickets and crazy amounts of stuff. A lot of what I did on that show, there's a lot of books. So I'd have to research what edition of this book would have been in print at the time of the episode. I would have about 2 days to obtain a whole bunch of copies. Whenever you see something in a show, there's almost always 3 copies made. So when you see somebody walking through a frame with this book, they want 3 of them, and sometimes 6. If anything happens to it in the shot, somebody rips a page out or writes in it, they want 30. And it's for what they call resetting. So they cut, prop master hands them a new copy, takes the old copy, and they just keep shooting, the camera keeps rolling. So a lot of what I did with books is take beat up old books. I used to have to call book dealers all over the country and say, hey, do you have access to FedEx? Do you have this book? Can you send it to me tonight so I can get it tomorrow? And then I'd have to make them look brand new again. Evidence tags, handset, letterpress type, hospital paperwork. That's a fairly major prop in the final season. I had to do an entire Chicago phone book, and it was for a scene where these guys steal some money that they're carrying in a bag, and they they swap the money out for a phone book and give it to the guy, and he's supposed to think it's money. They ended up shooting a torn up newspaper, so the phone book never got used. This is what I call a stunt book, or a practical effect book. This book appears in a scene where this guy Chalky White is in jail, and his wife or daughter brings him a book, something to do while he's in jail. He's in a cell with a bunch of other people, and this guy doesn't know who Chalky White is, and he starts bugging him, and Chalky's just sitting there reading his book, ignoring the guy. So the guy gets irritated and he stands up. Chalky, we see, is looking at an illustration in the David Copperfield book. So again, this is one of the editions that would have been available at the time. I had to remake the binding, reprint all the images on the front. The book inside is the actual old book. Or what the guy does is he's irritated that Chalky's ignoring him and grabs the book out of his hand. Chalky's still holding the page with the illustration. It rips out, then the guy throws the book against the wall. So what I had to do for that is how to figure out how to make that work. So I super strengthened the binding. I bound in each, I did 3 copies. In each copy I bound in a tab about a ½ inch wide, and I printed a whole bunch of the torn up page, pre-tore them all exactly the same, because the shots, even though it's a different tape, they all have to look exactly the same. Everything has to look exactly the same. And then glued them onto the tabs with post-it glue, and I glued in 3 so that they could do 3 takes with the same book and then reset with another book while they're putting pages in the first book again, reset with the 3rd book because the takes go pretty fast. And it had to survive being slammed against the wall repeatedly. So, and that comes up a lot. There's a scene in Silver Linings Playbook where he's reading a Hemingway book in the attic of his parents' house, and he gets to the end of the book, and he goes, "What the fuck?" And he throws it out the attic window. So we see him reading it, we see him throwing it, then we see an outside shot from down below of the window. We see the book flying out and flying through space, and then we see what's called an insert shot, a close-up shot of the book landing on the grass. So that's 3 or 4 different books. There's the book he's reading and throws. The book that flies out of the window is bound so that there's a front cover on both sides and the spine on both edges, so that no matter which way it comes out the window, we're always going to see the cover. And then the book that lands on the grass is another copy of the ordinary book. So you get asked to do the weirdest things. I'm making a book right now that John Wick uses to kill a bunch of guys with. More Boardwalk paperwork. You can see she's cheating it so we can see the cover. The daily racing form is over there. That's the entire April 1st, 1921 daily racing form. They wanted the whole paper reproduced, which involved just a massive amount of research. And then that's how we see it. I had to create all these files. They're over there with, I had to make up identities, crimes, addresses, names, aliases. I mean, there's tons of writing involved. First scene where he's leafing through files of wanted men, and then he comes up, he comes up with, so there they are, they're looking through, those files are over there. Then he comes up with one of the characters from Boardwalk Empire. He goes, "Hey, wait a minute, I know this guy." And again, that's one of the things that you got to make props to appear like that, because they often do. They might not even be seen, they might be cut out, but you can't count on that. There's the files, multiple copies of each file. Just hundreds of hours of work right there for that one little short scene. This was a kind of a creepy one. This I had to make. There's a scene in the final season of Boardwalk Empire. This is another way that directors use props to convey something wordlessly in a very simple scene. Nucky Thompson is the main character in Boardwalk Empire. In the final season, we see him as a young child. He starts working at a hotel for a guy called the Commodore, who we've seen previously in the present day of the previous seasons, the present day being the early 20s. And the Commodore has this girlfriend named Jillian Darmody, whose file we saw earlier. So we see Nucky, as a young boy, he's working for the Commodore. He walks into his office and he sees these photos spread on a desk. This is a screenshot. And from that, he gets the idea of what it is the Commodore likes, which is young girls. Sex with young girls specifically. Well, that is a very, very difficult thing to work on for a lot of reasons, some of them legal. And so that was a road I did not want to go down. And so what I did was I got period photos of women and I de-aged them in Photoshop. So that's hours and hours of work in Photoshop, changing their head sizes, flattening their chests, making their arms thinner and their hands larger. I don't know how successful it was, but I almost don't care. It worked in the scene. And that communicates a huge amount. That's just a huge part of that series, and the whole ending of the series pivots around this shot. If you've seen the show, or if you've seen it a couple of times, and you follow that thread of who the Commodore is and who Jillian Darmody is and what Nucky is to her and what he does to her, it's all pivoting around that shot. This is from the Knick handset toe tag, handset 19th century type. Did a lot of work on the Knick. This is that book that's right over there. Walpurgis Nacht. Interior pages. This was done for a movie. It was created by a bunch of amateurs down in West Virginia. The script was written by a history teacher, and he got a whole bunch of his students and friends. He's just one of those guys who didn't seem particularly charismatic, but somehow or other managed to put together this entire movie using total amateurs who'd never done anything like it before or since. Quentin Tarantino uses Red Apple brand tobacco in every film since Pulp Fiction. So I created this for Hateful Eight. There's the can. We actually see it in the background, and on set I created a lot of those things on the shelves as well. This is some of the stuff that's hanging over there. I realize I'm running late, so I'm whipping through this stuff. This I did, again, lots of research. These are handmade wooden matchboxes. Safety matches were very common. They've been around for a long time. The time of the show is around 1870. But they wanted, Tarantino loves those old spaghetti westerns. He wanted to do these scenes where the guys were extreme close-up and they kind of squint at something, and then they put a cigarette in their mouth, and then they light a match in slow motion. We see it flare up. So that's a special effects match, and those are light anywhere matches. So I had to change that label to paraffin matches, which is what's hanging over there. Then he said, create a whole bunch of tobacco brands for everybody and make one of them based on Indians, So that was the only direction I got for this. And these are all handmade cigarette packages, hand-rolled cigarettes. We rolled about 200 cigarettes for that show. Oswaldo Mowbray's card. Daisy Domergue's warrant. There we see them reading it. This letter features fairly prominently in the movie. I won't wreck it for you if you haven't seen it. It's from Abe Lincoln. I just wrecked it, didn't I? Bones, this is for the TV show Bones. That's a 1/4-inch copper plate inset in the cover. The lead actress in that is an animal activist, so we had to create a convincing old leather-brown book not using leather. So that's bound in Italian upholstery fabric, faux leather, and old canvas. And there they are using it. These are some prop jobs that I've done for magazines. These are all for the New York Times. That's a book cover. That's another book cover. New York Times, Wired magazine. Now I've started designing stuff for the real world. So these are patches that I made for a company here in New York City called Best Made. They asked me to design a portable writing desk. This was built by a company out in Ohio called Gerstner. There's photos of it. It was, I guess, a relative success. So they asked me to design a cabinet. So I designed this, and this was built by Gerstner. And so I call out all the hardware and I source it, and I provide the manufacturers or distributors of all the stuff. And there's many more drawings. This is just sort of the main overview drawings. Lots of drawings with measured drawings and stuff. There's the cabinet set up for catalog photography in my studio. They put it online. It sold out in 2 weeks. So they're building some more. This was a bandana they hired me to make for their opening of their new store in Los Angeles. And based on that, Justin Timberlake approached him and asked him about designing a bandana. He had a pop-up store in New York City, and he also wore it during the Super Bowl halftime show. That's real Justin Timberlake sweat on that, people. There he is. There's me and my pal, Justin. He's going, who's this guy? That was the Valentine's Day bandana. I just designed a new bandana for the store, which is going to be out very soon. It's available for Father's Day. That Valentine's Day bandana sold out in 20 minutes. There's my studio. It's a little old barn up in Connecticut. And there's 2007, working on props for National Treasure. My daughter is sewing copies of the Booth Diary. Child labor laws? What are those? There's me in the studio a couple of years ago. I actually swapped out those lights. Those are ugly. This is building some of the hardware for the Walpurgis notebook. It's 18 gauge copper, heated to both harden it a little bit and also to discolor it a bit. I have a contact allergy to brass, so that's why I'm wearing leather gloves. Even though it's not brass, it's just there's a lot of brass filings around. I get like poison ivy from it. Discoloring brass hardware. This book was supposed to be bound in human skin. Wasn't able to find any volunteers, so I used a goat. Goats are easier to convince. The lettering's burned into the cover with a wood burning tool. I tell you, you haven't lived to smell burning goat hide. It's just do a cologne. Binding the books. I perfect bind them, but I cut a saw curve in the spine and snap a glue-covered string in for strength. It's actually a really old technique for binding sheet music. There's those glue-covered strings snapped in. These things are really strong. And to make a book look like it's been read over and over, you have to actually handle every page. You have to distress every single page, you have to wrinkle every page, and then you have to smooth it back out. There's the Vandercook press. There's some handsome guy leaning on the high-speed letterpress about 100 years ago. There's some 1860s type. Yeah, now we're at the good stuff finally. This is hand-cut wood type, it's unusual because the steam-powered router, which is used to manufacture wood type, was invented here in New York City in 1825. He marketed his first wood type in 1827. So you would think that this predates that, but the type style, that kind of Tuscan, post-dates that date. So it's kind of a mystery what's going on there. It's all hand-cut though. There's some big type, even bigger type, wood type ornaments. Some of that nice type set in a comp stick. And that's it.